but I was a little disappointed when I saw all of those who are gold sponsors, our dear friends in the well-heeled law firms. When I heard how much it was to be a gold sponsor, I had to say that gold has certainly fallen in quality. The terrible part of it is that we know how much these gentlemen and women are worth. So they really shouldn't give us this funny version of gold. I mean, we really must insist that they step up to the plate. But having said so, I must thank our colleagues who have been sponsors of this great event, and many of them have been sponsors year in, year out. And I really must thank you very much for keeping the flag flying. My 1 year as Vice President has shown me that there are certainly easier ways of earning a living than being a Vice President. I think I really did, in legal practice, at least you are reasonably certain that you will earn enough money to pay your children's school fees and those sorts of things. And you don't receive the number of requests for sponsorship that I now receive. And this is after I managed to declare all my assets to, everybody knows exactly how much I'm worth. But despite that, people still insist that there must be something somewhere that I've not yet disclosed. But let me just say for certain that what you see is all there is, and it's not likely to get any more in the coming years. I heard someone say, he said it is not likely. But that's not, but trust me, I mean, it will not be, it will just remain, more or less the same. I really would, I have a prepared speech which I will give to the organizers so that this can be circulated. But what I intend to do is just speak to a few of the issues that I've outlined here, which I think might be important as some of the thoughts that I have on law reform and the economy. And some of these things, of course, have been mentioned before, and I'm sure that you're all quite familiar with them, but I just want to speak to them again with the hope that at least we might be able to get more traction on them by just the fact that we're all talking about it. We need to look at issues around the ease of doing business and how legislation can somehow assist with that. Just this afternoon, I was at a meeting, the inauguration of the Ease of Doing Business Council, which the President recently inaugurated, and I'm chair of that council. The Vice Chair is the Honorable Minister for Industry, Trade and Investment. The whole idea of the Ease of Doing Business Council is to bring together the public and private sector. By the way, Mr. Sheyi Bickerstead, the national principal partner of KPMG, is an important member. In fact, he is the chairman of the steering committee, to look at ways of generally creating a better environment for business. Now, a lot of talk has gone around this business of how to make business, how to make business easier to do in Nigeria. We were number 169 or so of 189 on the list of, on the World Bank's list of ease of doing business countries and the problems they have with ease of doing business. But we fall very low. We're just 20 countries away from the bottom. But I think the important point is that The reason why we've had the problem we've had is not really that we don't have the kind of laws that we should have, but that there is a need to enforce those laws and to show a bit more commitment to them. And this is not just a government matter. It is, in many senses, the work of the private sector as well, and of course, our work as lawyers. Land titling issues, for instance, play a very important role in this ease of doing business. We, of course, need to work with the states to ensure that land titling becomes easier, that we're able to receive title to land, and in fact, that land itself is titled, but that it's easy to obtain all of those, to obtain permits to land, building approvals, and those sorts of things. While I was Attorney General of Lagos State, we tried to do a bit of reform in that area. One of the key things we did was to shorten the time that it takes between your applying for a C of O and getting it. But despite our best efforts, I think we were able to reduce the time at some point to 30 days or so. And then the Attorney General was the only one who signed private certificates of occupancy. But then we got 5 other lawyers in the cabinet to sign. So more people were able to sign. But despite that, there are still huge problems around titling in our commercial nerve center, which is Lagos. So the question is, how do we resolve those problems? And part of it might be to remove many of the rules and to make land titling questions easy to do, possibly electronically. And I know that the Lagos State government is already looking at those issues, and we're in discussions also with them on how to do some of these things. Pre-investment approvals, again, is another issue, setting up companies and all of that. And part of what our task will be to ensure that we're able to give a specific, to be able to say specifically how long it will take to get any of these approvals. And one of the things that the council is going to do is to actually set time limits. One of the key drivers of this whole process is someone who has done a lot of work in Georgia, the country of Georgia, where we found that they were able to do many of the things we want to do very quickly. It's a small country, but sets very important examples for us. And one of the key things they talked about is how to do what they say, what they describe as silence is consent. So if you apply for a certain approval and there's a specified time for that approval to be granted, if it's not granted, then it is taken that government has accepted or that government has approved it. So silence is consent. Now, that may involve some legislative tweaking, but I think it's an important thing that if we are committed to doing, to easing the process, and especially time, the time it takes to get things done, then we must set ourselves certain timelines, and we must be able to introduce certain types of sanctions in order to ensure that this is done. There's the area of adjudication, the whole business of settling disputes. And this again requires some radical thinking. Of course, those of us who practice in the courts, especially those of us who are involved in commercial litigation, know how frustrating it is. Just any type of litigation, but generally speaking, commercial litigation is even more frustrating because business people expect that issues will be settled quickly and efficiently, and at least they'll know what they need to do next. But our system is so slow that it has attracted all manner of negative comments from everywhere in the world. I was speaking to their lordships at the last judicial conference and quoted a judgment of the Court of Appeal in England where they said that there is no time limit to judicial decisions in Nigeria, the judicial process in Nigeria. And there's just no time limit. There's no way of knowing when it will end once it starts. So it's not so much a matter of access to the courts, it's a matter of exit from the court system, when you exit. So people don't know. So I think it's important for us to not only just think about it seriously, but to take some decisive action regarding this. For example, if you look at arbitration, I think arbitration is supposed to be an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. But today you find that arbitration itself can be caught in the web of the legal process because somebody can go and challenge it in court, slow the process down, and everything comes to a halt. But I think it's time for us to be able to say that when you have an arbitration clause in an agreement, then it should completely oust the jurisdiction of the courts, such that the courts cannot interfere in any way, so long as the parties agree to go to arbitration. And I think that if we don't do that, if we're unable to say that arbitration is a final way of resolving disputes, then alternative dispute resolution is itself not going to work very much. The other thing we need to look at, and this is also by way of law reform, are questions around the appellate process and how long it takes to go through that appellate process. Today, in any case, you can go on an interlocutory point, you can go all the way to the Supreme Court. You can take any kind of matter all the way to the Supreme Court. Aside from the fact that the Supreme Court, we've got to find ways of ensuring that the Supreme Court is less burdened with the various, especially interlocutory applications and all of that. And there are already bills, there's in fact a bill which seeks to do so. But I think more importantly, we must be able to terminate interlocutory appeals at some stage, especially at the Court of Appeal. So perhaps, the sorts of legislation we should be looking at is those that say that interlocutory questions must terminate at the Court of Appeal, and not even all of them should go to the Court of Appeal. So I think that some of these issues need to be resolved by way of legislation as quickly as possible. I listened to the President on the PIB and what we need to do with the PIB. Fortunately or unfortunately, the PIB has not been passed. And I say fortunately or unfortunately because part of the reason why it might be fortunate is because many of the issues in the oil sector are somewhat moving targets. And we're at a point where perhaps what we need to do is to be able to resolve, especially for us as a country, is to be able to resolve some of the agreements that we have, the types of agreements we have. Of course, it's important to resolve the fiscal issues, which is really what we should concern ourselves with the PIB, aside from the other political issues of who gets what. But the fiscal issues are issues, and financial issues are issues that we should concern ourselves with in the PIB. But what seems to be the problem for us today are really more how our JVs, the joint venture, the joint ventures are structured, especially our cash call deficits and how to address those cash call deficits. Because however you choose to structure, however you choose to write your PIB, it must still be the case that you must find a way of resolving questions around who pays for our own portion of the joint venture, who pays and how. Over time, we have somehow found a way of not paying. So we've been, there's a huge backlog. But aside from that, there are also questions around PSCs, our production sharing contracts, and whether those production sharing contracts should be framed the way they are. And these are not necessarily legislative issues. There are more issues around, agreements and how agreements are drawn up and whether those agreements are fair or not fair. I think for us, really, the major problems today revolve around questions of how those agreements we've entered into are run, how those joint ventures are run, how those PSCs are run, and what we need to be doing going forward. Today we are talking a lot about what to do with those agreements. Some are saying corporatize the JVs. Some are saying structure the JVs as structure the petroleum contracts in the petroleum NNPC in the way NLNG is organized and all of that. Structure your contracts, giving the majority to not the contract. Structure your the NNPC, giving the majority to today, our JV partners, the IOCs, and all that. Sell a bit, sell off some of your holdings, and all that. There's so many questions, but frankly, the questions are not so much questions around the PIB and resolving the PIB. I think the major issues are around how our agreements look, how we want to structure those agreements, and fidelity to those agreements is for me possibly more important and more pressing. But of course, the PIB, as you said, is a very important legislation, and we must pay attention to it, especially because we need to resolve the fiscal issues. But if you speak to many of the IOCs, people can say, yes, we are waiting for the PIB, but people are waiting for, contractual terms that will favor them. And if they can get those, I'm sure they wouldn't be paying too much attention to, necessarily to our laws. Competition law is, again, an area where I think we should be spending a lot of time. And there is a bill already before the National Assembly. And of course, we'll be looking at cartels, questions around collusive conduct, time, bundling, and all of those sorts of issues. But the time has come for competition laws. There are so many areas that we should be looking at some of these. The airlines, the airline industry, some of the problems that we've had with the airline industry at various times, and I think we should be looking very closely at how we can resolve some of those using our competition laws. But I won't be able to spend much time on that, but just to underscore the fact that there's already legislation before the National Assembly on competition. ASUE has already fired the first shot by saying that it's about to create another monster. But well, I hope we're all paying attention to it so that the monster doesn't emerge before we get a chance to catch it. Aside from competition law, there's also, I'd also want us to just pay some attention to what is going on in technology. The other day, Apple launched its Swift playgrounds for the iPad. I don't know how many of us caught that. So Apple is writing this, is introducing this new language for teaching children in particular how to program and how to write computer programs. And it's interesting because, of course, as you know, they're in competition with Google, with Microsoft, with the other big technology companies. But it's very important for us to bear in mind that maybe 20 years ago or so, what was important was language, the English language, the French language, English language in our case. But today, the programming language of computers is possibly going to be more important, and in the next few years, even more so. And what is the reason for this? And that's the reason why, by the way, why Apple is introducing this language and teaching and trying to teach young children, trying to teach children in school, in primary schools and all that. Estonia, which is a very tiny country, and they, by the way, invented Skype, started teaching children in primary school computer language almost 10 years ago. And they are the ones who developed Skype and lots of other software. But today, you will find that everything that we're doing is going to revolve around all those algorithms and the other things that conduce to writing software and to writing programs. If you look, for instance, at even the applications that we see today, the applications that there are, look at an application that can answer some of the legal questions that you and I would have been asked to answer before now. For example, somebody wants to ask a question, a foreign client wants to know whether a particular payment will infringe the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the UK Bribery Act. Today, an app can answer that question. So there's no need for you and I to say anything to that anymore. And it's becoming more and more so. Now, those who are designing those applications, and this comes to the whole question of revolutionizing legal training and all that. Those who are designing those applications and who are writing the language, rather than learning English, those who will be coming behind us will be learning the language, the sort of language that can draw from all the legal resources. For example, if I want to write an application that can solve legal problems, it must be an application that can show consistency in Court of Appeal decisions and Supreme Court decisions, show consistency in all the laws. It should be able to tell me whether a particular law, which I'm citing, has been reviewed or conflicts with another law. It should be able to tell me whether there is a case that conflicts with another, whether the Supreme Court has been consistent or hasn't been consistent. So language itself, the language of the computer itself is going to change everything. It's going to change the way we do business, even the way we learn, the way we study law, what will be taught in our law schools, and all of that. And I think that somehow we have to start preparing for that. We have to start thinking about that, because it's not going to take so long. I remember a few years ago, as Attorney General of Lagos State, we were trying to computerize our courts. We were way ahead of our time, because most of the judges were not interested in what we were doing as such, and because it was just a bother. I remember speaking to one of the chief judges at the time, and he was saying to me, he said, look, this thing is just too much trouble. That I open the thing, first I have to decide which button to press, and I knew it was a bother. I sat with him and took him through this, took him through that. But at the end of the day, I realized that the time just hadn't come. Today, practically every judge of the High Court of Lagos has a laptop. If you don't, there's no way you're not going to have a laptop. All of those things have become just normal. And in another 10 years, we're going to have a court system, whether we like it or not, that is almost driven completely electronically and almost completely by technology. So we need to be getting ourselves prepared for all of the challenges that will come with that. Of course, there are huge challenges around intellectual property. There are huge challenges around ownership. There are huge challenges around even just the commerce, the commercial aspects of all of these developments and all of these issues. And I find that as government, when we negotiate with international conventions and all that, paying attention to those things has become so important, because everybody today is negotiating with bearing in mind that in another 10 years or so, what we say today is going to dramatically change, and technology is going to be playing a very active role in it. I also wanted to mention very quickly, as I round up, carbon markets. I'm sure that many of us are reasonably familiar with some of the conventions on climate change and all of that, and especially the opportunities that have been produced now by all of the issues around carbon markets. Incidentally, as I was preparing for a meeting in Lusaka, I think it was the AFDB meeting, where we were to talk about some aspects of climate change, I came across an article written by a lawyer from Bangwa and Igudalo on carbon credits in Nigeria, And it's obvious that people are already beginning to think about this and talk about this and all that. But I think it's very important that carbon-related business is going to play a crucial role in not just legal work, but also business, in commerce. And especially in our case, because of fossil fuels and all of the gas flaring that we have. And I think that is something that we have to start talking about now, and especially legislation in that respect. The treatment or tax treatment for in the carbon market, intellectual property, ownership issues, and all of that in the carbon market. There is we of course signed up to the Kyoto Protocol and all of the other climate change conventions, but local legislation that will take this into account has to come from business lawyers and those of us who are seated in this room. It will be important for us to very quickly see what is going on in other jurisdictions and be able to take maximum advantage of some of the mistakes they've made so that our own legislation can come out looking much better. These are some of the thoughts I have, but I want to just say, just as I close, that my view is that the future of our nation, strangely enough, depends on us. And when I say us, I refer to those of us who are seated in this room, because we represent the elite of our society. And, you know, somehow, whether we accept it or not, the weight of what happens to our society really rests squarely on our shoulders. Sometimes when I read comments on social media from, you know, various comments and all that, I realize, you know, how very little people know about so much that we should know about. But we who are really the repositories of a lot of knowledge and a lot of information, I think that our society is going to depend a lot on us in the coming years. As a lawyer in government, I find that it's a huge and awesome responsibility that we bear. And all of these years of training as a lawyer, I think it is for me, it converges at this point. Okay, so what are we going to do with this opportunity? What are we going to do with the opportunity of being in government at this time? The challenges are huge. A dwindling economy, you know, low oil sales, we want to diversify, issues in the Niger Delta, all sorts of things are going on. But the reality is that that is really the reason why we've been trained, and the reason why we have the opportunities that we have. But for me, I think the major problem is that we are yet to forge a consensus as an elite in this country. We are yet to find a consensus. There is no consensus on most of the critical issues. There's no consensus even on ethics, on integrity. There's even no consensus on corruption. To what extent do we accept corruption? To what extent do we think is okay? To what extent do we think that this is so completely unacceptable that it will destroy our society? That consensus is important. That consensus in being able to say, because sometimes, I mean, I've heard comments such as, look, leave that business alone, leave that corruption thing alone. You know, that's just the way things are. Let's look forward, you know, forget all that, let's just be forward looking. And it's just the way that we accommodate something that's completely wrong. How do we forge that consensus? Because there is no society that has been able to make progress where its elite has no consensus on questions of integrity, on questions of morals. If the elite does not have a consensus on what is right to do, and I'm not saying that the elite have to be all of one mind, the elite doesn't have to be. I mean, many in other countries that have been able to forge an elite were not saints. They were not. But for self-preservation and for the preservation of their own societies, they found that they needed to be selfless. And that's the only way. So we don't have to be saints. We don't even have to belong to the same religion. But we must accept that there is a certain fundamental minimum that must be acceptable in a society that wants to grow. If our society, if we as the elite accept certain forms of conduct, because they come from people who we know or are friends, unethical conduct, corrupt conduct and all of that, then our society isn't going to go anywhere. You know? And I think that we must be able to, as we speak about questions of law reform, we must speak about questions of ethics and how to enforce ethics, how to enforce those questions that make a difference in our lives. I was saying that, you know, sometimes, even as lawyers, you know, I remember being involved in a case where the particular individual I was prosecuting, particular individual got a group of people together from his zone, you know, just for purposes of the illustration. He got together the Southwest Lawyers Association, because I'm from the Southwest, to say that no, we protest, you should not prosecute this man. And there were lawyers from Southwest who came forward and said, no, don't prosecute him, because he's a Southwest lawyer, right? Now, the truth of the matter is that you and I know that all of this doesn't mean anything. We work well, the people from the Southwest, Southeast, Northeast, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference to those who want to steal the resources of the country or those who are corrupt. Because I was saying at a gathering earlier on that if you look at a list of those who have been accused of any offense in Nigeria, especially offenses in the federal government, you will never find 3 Igbo men, 3 Hausa men, or 3 Yoruba men, or 3 South men, no, never. You'll find 1 Igbo, 1 Hausa, 1 Yoruba, 1 man from the South, or woman, as the case may be. There is complete unity when it comes to these issues. There's no problem at all. So I think that those of us who say that our country must go forward must also be unified across zonal or tribal or whatever lines, and even across religious lines. Thank you very much.